If you found yourself here, it's probably because you have a strange and wonderful mind. Let me reassure you, you are in the right place. My name is Sarah, and this is Sarah After Dark. In today's episode, I'm going to take you back, way back, because we talk about spirits and we talk about ghosts and paranormal investigations, or if you'd prefer, ghost hunts. But where did it all start? First things first, ghost hunting is not new. It's not a new thing. In fact, humans have been trying to communicate with the dead for thousands of years. Ancient civilizations like the Egyptians, the Greeks and the Romans all believed that the dead could interact with the living. They held rituals, left offerings, and even built entire festivals around honouring spirits. But ghost hunting, as we see it today, really started to take shape in the 19th century. In fact, Victorians were obsessed with death, literally obsessed with all things to do with death. Actually, it was at this time that people really started to become open-minded at the idea of the afterlife. We've passed the era now where we would be deemed as witches if we even dabbled with anything supernatural, and it really did welcome the age of spiritualism. In the mid-1800s, there was a massive surge in people believing that they could talk to the dead. It became kind of a trend. People gathered in parlours for seances. Yes, those classic scenes with a group setting of everyone sat round a table, holding hands, waiting for a knock or a flicker of a candle. Mediums, i.e. people who claim to communicate with spirits, were at the centre of it all. Some were genuine believers and others, let's just say, were a little bit more theatrical. But ghost hunting tools back then were much more simple. They would rely on things like candles and attempt to get a flicker of a flame. They'd rely on taps and knocks for yes and no questions. But it began to really evolve quite quickly, and this is where we began to see the likes of table tipping and automatic writing. Table tipping relies on people standing around a table, resting their fingertips on the edges and attempting to get spirit to feed off that energy and make the table move, or even better, tip over. Automatic writing would be someone physically holding a pen quite freely, sometimes in a seance, and they would allow the spirit to guide somebody's hand to hopefully and eventually spell out names, words, or even dates. These were very popular and impressive tools in this era. People would gather to watch these investigations being done. It really began to evolve the ghost hunting world. People even in power and even members of royalty were all at it. They would even hire people to come to royal places, for example, and put on these ghost hunting shows. It was deemed as entertainment, but people's curiosity began to get greater. Another interesting method was something called the spirit slates. They were small chalkboards, usually sealed together, and what they would do before a séance is they would show everybody in the room that they were blank, just to prove a point. There's nothing written on them, they're completely blank chalkboards. Then either during or after the séance session, they would reopen the chalkboards to reveal a message which was written in chalk. Nobody ever witnessed it being written on or happening in front of their eyes as such, which, as you can imagine, either made it a lot more convincing or highly suspicious. But something was about to grab the ghost hunters' attention in the late 1800s, and it was a game changer. Pardon the pun. I say game changer because that was actually the Ouija board. In 1890, a businessman named Elijah Bond invented what was called the talking board. It was a board filled with letters and yes and no, and it came with a planchette. But this is where it gets interesting, because Bond didn't actually claim that the board worked. He was more focused on the idea that people wanted it to work. It was marketed as novelty, something a little bit exciting and a tad bit eerie. The name Ouija is a bit of a mystery in itself. There is 2 popular stories regarding its name. One of them is that when the board was very first used, so the real first session on the board apparently spelt out the word Ouija, and it stuck, and people really believed that the board had chose its own name. Now, the other version is simply a combination of the French and German word for yes. So in French they would say oui, and in German they would say ja, which would sound kind of like oui ja. You know? Either way, whatever the version is, the name stuck. And that is exactly what we know it as today. Some people call it still a talking board or a spirit board, but majority of people will refer to it as a Ouija board. But what made these boards so popular was its simplicity. Suddenly, ghost hunting didn't require a medium anymore. Any normal person with no claimed spiritual talent could use them, and they didn't require any training. You pop your fingers on the planchette, and if all works and all goes well, then it's going to spell something out. It's simple, and because of that, it spread quickly. In fact, by the early 1900s, talking boards or Ouija boards were being mass produced, and they were sold mainly across the United States and Europe. They were advertised as both a fun activity and a mystical experience. But here's where things started to shift. So the more people that bought and used these boards, the more the stories surrounding the boards began to change. People reported that the messages felt too personal. Some claimed that the board revealed secrets that nobody else could have possibly known, and others even said it predicted the near future or even delivered people with warnings. It really turned these boards into something else. They developed this ominous reputation. It was suddenly no longer just a game. In fact, it was linked to the idea of opening up doors to the unknown forces, and it began to connect more directly to ghost hunting. In fact, every paranormal investigator in this time period would carry one with them. It became one of the most known devices for spiritual communication. But even to this day, Ouija boards are still being used, but nobody truly knows how they work or even if they work. In fact, anyone who claims it to be a fact, unfortunately, is not telling the truth, because the truth is that we really don't know. Paranormal investigators who use the boards may claim that the spirit is using the people's energy, using the board, and the spirit is actually moving the planchette to spell out their message. But science and parapsychologists argue there is something called the ideomotor effect, basically tiny unconscious movements made by the participants themselves unknowingly. They believe that your brain nudges your muscles without even realising it, and that is what creates the planchette to move. That, alongside the fact that people really want these boards to work and really want the planchette to move, means that our brain is more likely to move the planchette. But the problem is, again, we don't know. Whether you see it as a psychological happening, a party game, or a genuine tool for contacting the unknown, the Ouija board has played a huge role in shaping paranormal investigation, which leads us on to the early 20th century. Things have begun getting interesting. Technology has evolved with the invention of radios and recording devices. It led a lot of people to wonder, what if spirits could use these to communicate? And in 1950, paranormal investigators wondered just that. And in comes the arrival of the EVP, which stands for Electronic Voice Phenomena, a tool still used today using a voice recorder. Investigators began asking questions to spirit, leaving small silent pauses after every question, and claiming that they could hear voices that had been recorded in them silent pauses. Tape recorders became one of the first modern ghost hunting tools that there was. Everyone was using them, and suddenly we have all of these evidential claims. We have thousands and thousands of hours worth of tapes of these EVP sessions, and everyone was amazed. Jumping into the late 20th century, ghost hunting began to look a lot more like what we see today. Technology again had evolved, and suddenly ghost hunters began using a whole range of gadgets. EMF meters became extremely popular, also known as the K2 meter. These devices are a tool designed to read and measure fluctuations in electric and magnetic fields. These devices were not made for ghost hunting. They were not designed for ghost hunting purposes. However, paranormal researchers believe that spirits cause these magnetic fields of energy, and ghost hunters began putting that theory into practice. So they started using these EMF readers alongside other ghost hunting tools, but they specifically noticed a pattern with these meters, even trying to prove it, asking spirit to step towards the box and make it go off, make all the lights flash up, and then asking spirit to step away from the box and creating that spike to go back down. It was impressive. People were genuinely impressed by these readers. Another one was actually the infrared thermometer, again still used today. These meters were designed to detect sudden cold spots or even to detect heat. Again, paranormal researchers believe that the presence of a spirit usually brings a cold spot, a drop in temperature. So ghost hunters soon picked up on this tool and tried again to study the theory. But something new for the ghost hunting world was about to be discovered and turn into the most iconic tool, and that was the spirit box. They also used to call it the ghost radio. So what actually is a spirit box? Basic terms, it's a modified radio that simply scans through AM and FM frequencies, sometimes multiple channels per second, creating a constant stream of noise which usually sounds like a static white noise. To most people, it sounds nothing more than chaos, but to paranormal investigators, it's a conversation waiting to happen. The idea of the spirit box didn't just appear out of nowhere. It actually evolved from something we spoke about earlier, the electronic voice phenomena, the EVP. Back in the 1950s, people were using EVP sessions, and when they were playing the tapes back later, they were discovering strange voices. But the EVP recorder has limitations. The limitation is you have to wait. You ask the question and sit there rewinding and listening to tapes back thinking, did I just hear someone say my name? Or was that the fridge? So naturally, people wanted something faster, something in real time, and that's where things began to get interesting. In the early 2000s, a paranormal researcher named Frank Assumption introduced a new device, and he called it Frank's box. This is widely considered to be the first true spirit box. Instead of recording and replaying, his device scanned through radio frequencies continuously, producing a live stream audio. The theory is that spirit can manipulate these fragments of sound and audio by grabbing bits of the sound and stitching them together to form a word or a sentence. In other words, instead of waiting for the ghost to leave a voicemail, you are currently having a live phone call with one. Skeptics will say that all you are hearing is just random radio chatter, and your brain is incredibly good at finding patterns in noise, something which is referred to as auditory pareidolia. So basically, your mind tries to turn the chaos into meaning. So the spirit saying hello might just be half of a radio DJ saying a line, but believers argue something different. They say that the timing of responses are intelligent, and paranormal researchers believe that spirits do have the ability to manipulate just about anything, especially radio frequencies. I have to say, I personally am a big fan of spirit boxes. I have the ITC research device, one of the best well-known and well-researched devices. I personally have had some very interesting encounters with spirit boxes, and I am a true believer that radio frequencies are the way forward. We spoke earlier about spirits creating these energy fields, and I truly believe that that is because spirit is energy. And if you think about spirit boxes, what do spirit boxes run and rely on? Well, They run on radio waves, which, if you didn't know, radio waves are basically electromagnetic signals. So the idea of spirit influencing these signals, for me, well, it's accurate. Anyway, by the year 2000, we really did see a turning point, not just because of the new tools and access to further technology, but because ghost hunting went mainstream. Suddenly we have these TV shows, online forums, and early YouTube brought investigations into people's homes. Suddenly it wasn't just a niche anymore, it became much bigger, and for some, even a hobby. And of course, yes, with the times advancing, it did in fact bring more technology and more recognised tools that you'll recognise and that you'll see today. EMF meters are still heavily used, infrared and night vision cameras, thermal imaging cameras, SLS devices, which are the ones with the stick figures and they look for human-like figures, REM pods, EMF pods, trigger objects, motion lights, and even apps on your phone. We're at a point now where anything is possible. We have so many options and tools, and yes, some are more favoured than others, and some of which maybe are a little bit suspicious. But the idea of each tool still remains the same. I personally love to blend the old with the new. You will find me with technology, but you'll also see me investigating with older methods like candles. I like to use basic things as trigger objects, but I'll have them maybe next to a REM pod. I like to mix it up, create my own style of investigation, because nothing is right and nothing is wrong, because the truth is and always will be that nobody can prove it's real and nobody can prove that it isn't. I think what's fascinating for me is when we're looking over the years and seeing how things have evolved, if you think about it, all of these tools and technology all rely on the same core idea. We are simply trying to create a system where the unseen can interact with the physical world. Whether it's knocks, bangs, movement, writing, or even spirit boxes and listening devices, people have always tried to translate something invisible into something they could understand, and the idea has never changed. We've just swapped chalkboards for digital recorders and candlelight for infrared cameras. I always wonder if the afterlife will eventually be physically proven, and I think the reality is there is proof all around us. The problem isn't the proof. The problem is people's understanding, people's acceptance and willingness for a truly open mind. Generations are evolving and becoming more open-minded at the possibility, and eventually I think it will just become the normal. Paranormal is my normal, but I would love it to just become the normal in general. Of course, there is a reason why I've done this episode today, and that's because I'm about to start a brand new video series on TikTok and on YouTube. I will be going over ghost hunting from the very start, all of the old tools and tricks and methods. I am going to try and use them to investigate. I will be testing out every single method and seeing what works and what doesn't work. It's something I personally have never seen done before, and I think it could be really interesting. I hope you enjoyed today's podcast. I will catch you next week for another Weird Wednesday, and until next time, keep being a little bit weird and even a little bit spooky. Good night.